Welcome to the Learning Speaking English channel. There comes a moment in life when you realize you've been trying too hard to make others understand you. You keep explaining your actions, your dreams, your worth, but no one truly listens. That's the story of Daniel, a man who lived in London, surrounded by the noise of life, yet quietly drowning in his own silence. Daniel wasn't born confident. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. In fact, he was the kind of man who always tried to justify every little thing. Every mistake, every dream, every decision. He would say sorry too often, explain too much, and doubt himself too easily. And perhaps you've been there too. There's a certain exhaustion that comes from constantly trying to be understood. From explaining every part of your life, your words, your English, your choices. Daniel lived in that exhaustion for years. He thought that maybe, if he just explained himself clearly enough, people would finally respect him. But life doesn't work that way. One winter morning in London, Daniel sat in a small cafe near the corner of Oxford Street. The world outside was busy. Buses rushing, footsteps echoing, voices mixing with the sound of coffee machines. He looked at people around him, speaking fluently, confidently, naturally. Their words flowed like music, and he wondered why his words never did. He spoke English, of course, but it wasn't just about language. It was about confidence. Every time he opened his mouth, he felt the weight of judgment, the fear of saying something wrong, the pressure of sounding perfect. So he stayed quiet. But here's the truth: silence is not peace when it comes from fear. Silence can also be a cage. Think about it for a moment. How many times have you stayed quiet because you were afraid your English wasn't good enough? How many times have you avoided sharing your thoughts because you thought someone might laugh? That's where Daniel was, trapped in that invisible prison. But something changed that morning in the cafe. As he watched a little girl talk to her mother in perfect, fearless English, something clicked inside him. The girl made mistakes, small ones, but she didn't care. She kept talking, laughing, expressing. Her confidence wasn't about grammar. It was about freedom. And Daniel thought, what if confidence is not about speaking perfectly, but about speaking anyway? That single thought became the seed of his transformation. Over the next few days, he started noticing how often people around him spoke with confidence, even when their grammar wasn't perfect. Tourists, immigrants, locals, everyone was using the language as a bridge, not as a weapon. And Daniel realized that he had been using English as a wall, a barrier between who he was and who he wanted to be. He began to ask himself hard questions. Why was he explaining everything? Why did he need validation for every word? Why did he need permission to speak freely? The truth was simple. Daniel didn't believe in himself. And that's where every story of transformation begins, with the courage to face your own reflection. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you truly believed in your own voice? Because no matter how many grammar rules you learn, no matter how big your vocabulary becomes, if you don't believe that your words matter, your English will never have life. Daniel made a decision that day. He decided to stop explaining everything, to stop justifying his thoughts, to stop apologizing for who he was, and to start learning not just English but himself. Daniel's decision was silent, but powerful. No announcement, no promises to anyone. Just a quiet whisper in his heart. I'm going to change. The next morning, he stood in front of the mirror. His reflection looked the same, but something in his eyes was different. Determination. Not the loud kind that screams, the calm kind that stays. He opened his laptop, searched for free English podcasts, and started listening. At first, he didn't understand every word. The accent sounded too fast, the expressions too new. But instead of giving up, he listened again and again, until the unfamiliar became familiar and the strange became simple. That's how real growth begins, not in a single day, but in small, repeated efforts that no one sees. He began carrying a notebook everywhere. Whenever he heard a new word, he wrote it down. Whenever he couldn't express a thought, he practiced it later. Slowly, he built a connection between thought and speech, between mind and mouth. In the evenings, he would walk through Hyde Park. The winter air was sharp, the sky gray, the grass wet with dew. But he loved those walks because that's where he practiced speaking to himself. He would narrate his thoughts in English about the weather, about the people, about his day. At first, he felt ridiculous talking to himself in public. But then he realized something profound. Every master was once a beginner who didn't care how they looked. Think about it, you can't become fluent if you're more worried about judgment than progress. You can't grow if your comfort matters more than your dream. Day after day, Daniel practiced. His voice grew stronger, his sentences smoother, his confidence deeper. Yet something else changed too, his mindset. Earlier, he used to believe that learning English was about impressing people. But now he understood that it was about expressing himself. He didn't learn to sound smart. He learned to sound sincere. And slowly, life started responding to his new energy. One afternoon at work, his manager asked for a volunteer to present a short report. Normally, Daniel would shrink back, pretending to be busy. But this time he raised his hand. His heart pounded, his palms sweated. Yet his voice didn't shake. He spoke clearly, simply, confidently. Not perfectly, but authentically. And for the first time, people listened. When he finished, there was silence, the kind that means respect. Then came applause. Not loud, but genuine. His manager smiled and said, "Good job, Daniel." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying that moment. Not because of the praise, but because of the peace he felt inside. The peace that comes when you finally stop hiding from your own potential. Ask yourself, what's stopping you from raising your hand in life? Fear of mistakes? Fear of laughter? Remember this, confidence is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear. From that day on, Daniel made a ritual. Every morning before leaving for work, he would stand before the mirror and speak one paragraph in English. Sometimes he spoke about gratitude. Sometimes about goals. Sometimes about nothing specific at all. But he spoke. He stopped judging his accent. He stopped counting his mistakes. He simply allowed his words to breathe. And the more he spoke, the more alive he felt. Weeks turned into months. His co-workers began noticing the difference. Daniel was no longer the quiet one in the room. He was thoughtful, articulate, and confident. People asked him for advice on improving their English, and that made him smile. Because not long ago, he had been exactly where they were. He realized something powerful. The moment you stop explaining everything to others, the world starts listening to you. When you constantly explain yourself, you give people permission to doubt you. But when you speak with quiet certainty, you give them permission to trust you. That's what learning English had done for Daniel. It didn't just give him words. It gave him identity. Months passed, and London changed again. Winter melted into spring. The city that once felt cold now looked alive. Not because the city had changed, but because Daniel had. When you grow internally, the world outside begins to mirror that change. One Sunday morning, he sat at the same cafe where everything had begun. The same corner seat. The same smell of roasted coffee. But he wasn't the same man. He opened his notebook, filled with words, meanings, and small victories, and smiled. Every page told a story of effort. Every mistake was proof he had tried. We often fear mistakes, but mistakes are the footprints of progress. Without them, there is no path. Daniel had stopped chasing perfection. He now chased clarity. He didn't want to sound impressive. He wanted to be understood. And that simple shift changed everything. At work, he began mentoring new employees. When someone struggled, Daniel reminded them, "Speak. Don't wait for the perfect word. The perfect word comes after the imperfect ones." He saw himself in their hesitation, and it made him kind. He learned one of life's greatest lessons. To teach is to grow twice. But life tests you when you grow comfortable. Months later, Daniel was invited to represent his team at a city event. He was to deliver a talk on communication and leadership. The old Daniel would have panicked. The new Daniel smiled, not because he felt ready, but because he knew he would learn. He wrote his speech simple, sincere, honest. On the day of the event, he stepped on stage, heart racing, but welcomed the fear. He began to speak, and people listened, not for his accent, not his grammar, but for his truth. He shared how he once feared speaking, how he over-explained everything, How learning English taught him self-trust. By the time he finished, the hall was silent. Then came applause, loud, real, lasting. People came to him later saying, "You inspired me." And Daniel realized, inspiration is the echo of honesty. He walked home that evening through the golden sunset over London and smiled. He finally understood what stop explaining everything truly means. It doesn't mean arrogance. It means acceptance. It means you no longer seek permission to exist. You no longer apologize for your voice. You no longer measure your worth by someone else's understanding. Ask yourself, how much of your life have you spent explaining yourself to people who never cared to listen? Every time you explain too much, you drain your own energy. Every time you justify your dreams, you make them smaller. The truth is, you owe no explanation for your growth, your journey, or your timing. You owe yourself the freedom to be. Daniel's life didn't become perfect, but it became peaceful. There's a difference. Perfection is loud. Peace is quiet. He still made mistakes, but he no longer carried the weight of embarrassment. Growth isn't about never falling. It's about standing taller each time. His colleagues noticed the calm in his tone, the certainty in his presence. When people spoke to him now, they felt heard. When he spoke, they felt inspired. That was his silent victory. He had stopped explaining everything, not because he had stopped caring, but because he had finally started living. He no longer explained why he studied, practiced, or worked on his pronunciation. He didn't need to. Self-improvement isn't isolation, it's transformation. He learned to say less and mean more. In a world that demands reasons, Daniel lived by truth. And truth doesn't need defense, only consistency. The more you explain yourself, the more people question you. But the moment you stop explaining and start becoming, people begin to understand without words. That's the quiet power of authenticity. Learning English had been the doorway, but self-belief was the home Daniel built beyond it. Each phrase he learned was a brick in the house of confidence. He no longer used English to impress others. He used it to connect, to grow, to inspire. Ask yourself, are you learning English to be accepted by others, or to express who you are? Because when you learn for expression, not validation, you'll never lose motivation again. Daniel's mornings became sacred. A cup of coffee, a quiet walk, a few minutes of speaking aloud, and a few words written in his journal. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about honoring his journey. Success doesn't come from explanation. It comes from evolution. One evening, by the River Thames, Daniel looked at the shimmering lights and whispered to himself, "I am enough. My voice is enough." That's the lesson Daniel's story leaves behind. Stop explaining everything. Stop over-defending your dreams. Stop waiting for people to understand your passion, your practice, your purpose. Just become so focused, so genuine, so consistent, that your life itself becomes the explanation. And if English is part of your journey, embrace it, learn it, love it. Don't let fear silence you. Don't let perfection delay you. Don't let doubt define you. Speak, even when your voice shakes, because every word you speak is a step toward freedom. Remember, English is not just a language, it's a bridge. And confidence is not about knowing every word. It's about trusting the ones you already know. So today, make a decision. Quiet one, just like Daniel did. Decide to stop explaining everything. Decide to start becoming everything you once tried to explain. Because when you do, the world will no longer need your words to understand your worth. They'll see it. If you like this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel.